Okay, we're on. Here, let me move the cursor off of that so I don't accidentally. So Lauren, but it takes me a moment. Okay. Everybody, this is what Lauren, I'm sorry, I keep saying your name over and over. This is Lauren's mistake. No, it's not a mistake. It's just a word choice, okay? Tactics were their main strength, which enabled the destruction of the weak. So enable, you enable someone to do something. Do you know what I mean? So we can't enable destruction. Does that make sense? But we enable someone to destroy. It was just easier to say that out loud than it was to actually. I should have just come over and said that next to you, now that I see this. But now that I've publicly aired Lauren's enabling. Okay, just a second. I have an Odysseus is not Jesus. That's what it, that's how it starts, but I don't know whose it is because it has no name. And I have another anger of Odysseus and Achilles that has no, you did put your name. So I'm gonna, these are just, I don't know whose papers these are, and I'm not gonna keep them forever.
None of that.
Okay, but, so Carson, Alexander, okay, so let me just bring them to each table just as a, you're not sure if they're yours?
Yeah, this is the one's mine because I put that down.
Okay, awesome. All right, now I will come around and collect your papers.
I'm using Google Docs.
Your crayas. Crayas. I'm collecting crayas. Oh, no, I did. Did I not just hand it back to you? Oh, no, that's okay. That's okay. No, so I'm sorry. I should answer people when they send me things. Lauren, that's rude, and also because you left not knowing. I don't like to email people because I'm like, did they get it? I don't know if they got it. Okay, crayas. I am collecting crayas. Ethan has left me. He has decided to leave. Crayas. Any more crayas? Okay, so this has already been discussed this morning, but we are going to discuss it now. Your next writing assignment. First of all, you're going to spend 2 weeks on this. So, but I just want to add, when I say spend 2 weeks on this, that is not code for don't do anything this week. Because you don't have to, because you have 2 weeks. This is not the translation of you have 2 weeks. So you have probably all acutely noticed that Herodotus tends to ramble just a tad. Might have noticed that. By just bringing in anything and everything he thinks might be related to the subject. And I'm hoping that today I can show you, we're going to breeze through book 4 in Thrace. We're just going to breeze through Thrace and hit book 5, because in book 5, stuff starts to happen that is critical to the attack of the Persians on Greece, okay? The spark gets lit, and it gets lit in the city of Sardis when they burn it down. But I agree that books 1 through 4 seem a little random. He does really have a point, believe it or not, but it takes several readings of Herodotus for you to catch it. But what I want you to do is I want you to write your own history in the style of Herodotus. It can be a history of anything. I don't care. I had a son who did a 12-page history of Bionicles. Oh, that makes me sad. They used to be, they're like Lego-ish sort of, they were these creatures, and they had books, and yeah, there's movies, and that my sons were very into Bionicles. Yes, a whole history. So I am not going to ask you to write 12 pages. I would like you to write 3 pages. Because how can you ramble in less than 3 pages? You can't ramble in less than 3 pages. Yes, I do. So, for instance, if you wanted to do a history of baseball, you could do the story of one particular baseball game, even. Or any sport. What might you have to include? Well, what kinds of bats are there? What kind of wood do they use to make the bats? Where do they get the wood that they use to make the bats? Where is the lumberjack's life like, that where they cut down the wood to make the bats? And what about those shoes? You know, there are very many places to buy shoes. Some places sell shoes other than just sporting shoes. Some stores don't sell sporting shoes at all. Can you believe that? Do you see what I mean? But do you see how all of that is related to baseball? But just in the most, sometimes the most nebulous of ways. So I'm serious. You can pick any topic you want. And if you are able, as much as you are able, try to, as they say, impersonate Herodotus. Talk like he would talk. Some people are better at it than others. Okay, don't worry, but do your best. Naya. Yes, unless you're telling the story of an actual event. Like say you wanted to tell the story of last year's Christmas dinner. So then that might go in some sort of order, right? Like it would involve people arriving at your house. It would involve cooking the food, serving the food, cleaning up. There would be a structure, but yet, in the meantime, you could talk about the various merits of turkeys from Hy-Vee versus Aldi, or turkey versus ham, or do you know what I mean? And what do you serve with the turkey and the ham? And then you could go on the people who like the cranberry sauce in the cans versus the cranberry sauce that's loose, you know, that you spoon up. And then the pumpkin pie lovers. Hey, and that could take you, maybe you went to a pumpkin patch. What did I insult? No, I said pumpkin pie, something like pecan pie. Do you know what I mean? That's not a moral failing. Does this make sense to everybody? I want to, now in your reading guide, I have an example. So I would like everybody to turn to page 45. And I'm going to read this out loud. This is C.S. Lewis. And now, this is a little different than what you will do because C.S. Lewis, as you will notice, obviously has a point. He is making a statement with his. But this is called Xmas and Christmas, a lost chapter from Herodotus. Okay, here we go. I love this. Now, by the way, the island he's talking about at the beginning is England. Okay? And beyond this, there lies in the ocean, turned towards the west and the north, the island of Niaturb, which Hecateus indeed declares to be of the same size and shape as Sicily, but it is larger, though in calling it triangular, a man would not miss the mark. It is densely inhabited by men who wear clothes, not very different from the other barbarians who occupy the northwestern parts of Europe, though they do not agree with them in language. So, guys, we are reading from page 45. We're reading the lost chapter from Herodotus, and I guess you guys just missed the writing assignment, didn't you? Oh, no, I mean, I just gave the new writing assignment. I'm sorry. Yeah, just listen to what I'm reading, okay? I'm reading on page 45. These islanders, surpassing all men of whom we know in patience and endurance, use the following customs. In the middle of winter, when fogs and rains most abound, they have a great festival, which they call Xmas, and for 50 days they prepare for it in the fashion I shall describe. First of all, every citizen is obliged to send to each of his friends and relations a square piece of hard paper, stamped with a picture, which in their speech is called an Xmas card. But the pictures represent birds sitting on branches, or trees with a dark green prickly leaf, or else men in such garments as the Nioturbians believed that their ancestors wore 200 years ago, riding in coaches such as their ancestors used, or houses with snow on their roofs. And the Nioturbians are unwilling to say what these pictures have to do with the festival, guarding, as I suppose, some sacred mystery. And because all men must send these cards, the marketplace is filled with the crowd of those buying them, so that there is great labor and weariness. But having bought as many as they suppose to be sufficient, they return to their houses and find there the like cards which others have sent to them. And when they find cards from any to whom they also have sent cards, they throw them away and give thanks to the gods that this labor is at least over for another year. But when they find cards from any to whom they have not sent, then they beat their breasts and wail and utter curses against the sender. And having sufficiently lamented their misfortune, they put on their boots again and go out into the fog and rain and buy a card for him also. And let this account suffice about Xmas cards. They also send gifts to one another, suffering the same things about the gifts as about the cards, or even worse. For every citizen has to guess the value of the gift, which every friend will send to him, so that he may send one of equal value, whether he can afford it or not. And they buy as gifts for one another such things as no man ever bought for himself. For the sellers, understanding the custom, put forth all kinds of trumpery, and whatever, being useless and ridiculous, they have been unable to sell throughout the year, they now sell as an Xmas gift. And though the Nioturbians profess themselves to lack sufficient necessary things, such as metal, leather, wood, and paper, yet an incredible quantity of these things is wasted every year being made into the gifts. But during these 50 days, the oldest, poorest, and most miserable of the citizens put on false beards and red robes and walk about the marketplace, being disguised, in my opinion, as Kronos. And the sellers of gifts, no less than the purchasers, become pale and weary because of the crowds and the fog, so that any man who came into a Nioturbian city at this season would think some great public calamity had fallen on Nioturb. This 50 days of preparation is called in their barbarian speech the Xmas rush. But when the day of the festival comes, then most of the citizens, being exhausted with the rush, lie in bed till noon. But in the evening they eat 5 times as much supper as on other days, and crowning themselves with crowns of paper, they become intoxicated. And on the day after Xmas, they are very grave, being internally disordered by the supper and the drinking, and reckoning how much they have spent on gifts and on the wine. For wine is so dear among the Nioturbians that a man must swallow the worth of a talent before he is well intoxicated. Such, then, are their customs about the Xmas. But the few among the Nioturbians have also a festival, separate unto themselves, called Christmas, which is on the same day as Xmas. And those who keep Christmas, doing the opposite to the majority of the Nioturbians, rise early on that day with shining faces and go before sunrise to certain temples where they partake of a sacred feast. And in most of the temples they set out images of a fair woman with a newborn child on her knees, and certain animals and shepherds adoring the child. The reason of these images is given in a certain sacred story, which I know but do not repeat. But I myself conversed with a priest in one of these temples, and asked him why they kept Christmas on the same day as Xmas, for it appeared to me inconvenient. But the priest replied, "It is not lawful, O stranger, for us to change the date of Christmas, but would that Zeus would put it into the minds of the Nioturbians to keep Xmas at some other time, or not to keep it at all. For Xmas and the rush distract the minds even of the few from sacred things. And we indeed are glad that men should make merry at Christmas, but in Xmas there is no merriment left." And when I asked him why they endured the rush, he replied, "It is, O stranger, a racket," using, I suppose, the words of some oracle, and speaking unintelligibly to me, for a racket is an instrument which the barbarians use in a game called tennis. But what Herodotus says, that Xmas and Christmas are the same, is not credible. For first, the pictures which are stamped on the Xmas cards have nothing to do with the sacred story which the priests tell about Christmas. And secondly, the most part of the Nioturbians, not believing the religion of the few, nevertheless send the gifts and cards and participate in the rush and drink, wearing paper caps. But it is not likely that men, even being barbarians, should suffer so many and great things in honor of a God they do not believe in. And now, enough about Niobe. Okay, so C.S. Lewis is always awesome. That was C.S. Lewis. And obviously, C.S. Lewis had a purpose. He was taunting us for the commercialization of Christmas, okay? But brilliantly, because he's C.S. Lewis, in the voice of Herodotus and the style, it's a certain sacred story, which I know, but do not think it is right here to repeat, you know, and Herodotus says this enigmatically, like, what? So Kyle and Ethan, what you are going to do over the next 2 weeks is you are going to write your own, Carl, I'm sorry. Ethan and Carl, I'm sorry. You know what? I've been here, I've been talking for 2 hours straight at this point, and like that's why I start to lose it. Like you guys get the worst of me. You don't actually get the worst. Yesterday I have about 5.5 hours. I have 5 classes, like 3 Latin classes and this class and the junior high class. And by the time I get to my poor last Latin student, it's like, yeah, I don't know what's going on anymore. I'm hungry and I'm tired. I'm translating it all over the place. Anyway, Ethan and Carl, I would like you have 2 weeks to do this, to write your own history in the style of Herodotus on anything you want. History of anything. I told them that I had a child who did 12 pages on bionicles, the history of bionicles, which you may or may not know what they are. It's a toy. So I would like 3 pages because you've got to ramble a bit. So I will give them the example. I'm repeating myself for some of you. So the example I gave to them while you guys were out of the room was, what if you were doing the story of last year's Christmas dinner? So it would have a structure, right? You would have people arriving, preparing the food, eating the meal, cleaning up, going home. You would have a structure. But in the meantime, you could go off and you could discuss sizes of turkey, turkey versus pheasant, turkey versus ham, turkey from Hy-Vee versus turkey at Aldi, whether one should cook the turkey the day before, and should you stuff, this is important, should you put the dressing in the turkey? Or should you put it separately outside, and how there are rivalries among the people as to this, and perhaps the canned cranberry sauce that comes shaped like a can, which is my favorite, by the way, or the scooping cranberry sauce that's all loose. Do you see how you could bring that stuff in? And then football. Right, is there football on Christmas? There's football on Thanksgiving. Okay, so that would have to be for Thanksgiving. And then you could go off on football, and then you could go off on cleaning, and then you could go on cleaning supplies. Should you use a rag? Should you ever put your china in a dishwasher? Like, do you see how this could turn into a big thing when you bring in everything outside of it? Okay, Ethan's looking at me with a face that shows incredulity and confusion, perhaps. Oh, does it make sense? Okay, Matthew. Yes, you're studying it. You're coming from outside and you're studying this phenomenon. It's a baseball game, it's a soccer game, it's a movie theater, it's a whatever. It could be an event, it could just be a thing. I don't know, it's not very, but almost anything. Like if Herodotus studied cotton balls, I feel like he'd have at least 3 pages. Because think of all we could discuss slavery and plantations and cotton and shipping the cotton up the Mississippi and fake fibers. You could say a lot. Yes. Okay, Alexander, what did you want to say? Oh, yes. Don't do research. And you know what you can say? This is just what I've been told. I do not know the truth of this. This is what I have heard. Because it's what Herodotus does, right? This is what I've been told. Have fun with it, all right? If you can do it in a Herodotian voice, if that is such a thing, Herodotian, do so. If that just is difficult. But I have a feeling if you've been keeping up with the reading, if you've even been doing half the reading, this has got to be filtering into your minds, you know, sort of the way he talks and the way he describes things. Okay? So do not wait a week and then do it all the second week. I think, did I say this to you guys or to the junior high kids? That to you. You're welcome. Okay. No, it's fun. And they will be fun for me to read. I still have, I'm pretty sure, I know I have my son's Bionic one. I might have it on the computer, but I've got a copy of it at home because it's like, this is just hilarious because he loved Bionicle so much, and I had to play that blessed game. I hated the Bionicle game. Like, can we play the Bionicle game? Yes, I'll play the Bionicle. Anyway, and then I'd watch that movie. The movie was ghastly. Okay, so art of the week. Uh-oh, what does that even mean? So our art of the week, gentlemen, is not wearing any clothes.
What?
And so I did not do this to you. The Greeks did this to you. I am just the messenger. Because it is almost impossible to look at Greek art without there being somebody with no clothes on. I'm sorry, but it's just that's the way it was. But I went. No, this is Greek. This is Greek art. The reason being that, as we know, the Greeks had the habit of exercising naked, and, which makes more sense than you would think. We have the habit, many people in modern America, of exercising in skin-tight stuff that you practically might as well be naked anyway because we can see every bulge. Just saying. All right, come back, calm down. See, I wanted you guys to be better than this. Don't wear any clothes. Okay, let's just calm down. Naya's like, oh my gosh. So the statue that I'm going to show you is one of a type of statues. They're called akouros. You don't have to write this down, by the way. And the plural is kouroi. And if it's a lady, she's called a kore. And this just means, as far as we know, this just means young man and maiden. And they're just statues of a guy. The ladies are wearing clothes, but the guys are cooler to look at, so I brought a guy. Didn't mean that the way it sounded. So this, okay, stay with me. This is from this archaic period. It's actually from the period that we're reading about in Herodotus right now. All right, this was made at the same time. We find these in various places, but often on graves. And I'm just going to, before I show you, because as soon as I show you, then everybody gets distracted. All right, we actually know the name of this guy. His name is Croesus. He died in battle. His family built the statue and put it up at his grave. And on the inscription at the base of the statue, it says, "Stay and mourn at the tomb of dead Croesus, whom raging Ares destroyed one day as he fought in the foremost ranks." Many of these we don't know. They're just a random guy. All right? So here we go. Take a deep breath.
No.
Here's our guy. Okay? Now, here's what I want you to notice. Here's what I want you to know. I'm going to put it down. He's standing like this. His hands are in fists like this, and he's standing like this. What other group of people make statues that are very, like, Egyptians? Maybe, I don't know anything about Chinese art, but I was going for Egyptians. Egyptian. We get the sideways thing, and so if you look up Egyptian art, they've got this very stiff, and they're just like staring into the distance, and their hands are always down at their sides. They're not like this. You know, there's not any like this. It's always like this. Often, they still have stone in between their legs. Like they don't even clean out between their legs. Do you know what I mean? That didn't come out right at all. Yeah, there's stone, so it's attached into a block, and like they're walking out of the block. Sometimes there's nothing between their arms, like their hands are attached. There's a block of stone. Yes. So this guy, he has his hands attached, and his calves are enormous. And some of the, I mean, just like this guy's been doing these just on the stairs for hours. And so this is a later one. He's better proportioned, like he has normal proportions except his legs are really big. Some of them, the early ones, have shoulders like out to here and waists like this. Do you know, like they're not like any human being would ever be. But now we get to this. So I'm gonna leave it. If you want to take, I'm not gonna foist it on you, but it's here if you want to take a closer look. The reason I bring it is because within 100 years, within less than 100 years, we're going to move from that, which shows that they've been interacting with Egypt and Egyptian art, which Herodotus has told us about various Greeks planting colonies in Egypt and Greeks going and fighting in Egypt. We know there's back and forth there. We're going to go from that to the statues that we think of when we think of classical Greek sculpture. Very fluid, very, like they're moving, like they're in motion, very proportioned correctly, not with enormous legs. Or who stands like this? Who stands like this? Nobody stands like this. And it's fascinating because it happens so fast historically. Like 100 years is nothing over the course of history. Do you know what I mean? So, but think of how art has changed over the last 150 years. Do you know? Like we go from the rise of Impressionism, if you know anything about art, up till modern art. Think of Impressionists and Picasso, and then compare that with something from, 200 years ago. Some sort of, would be after the Renaissance, some sort of, like portraiture. Very, very, I'm thinking of, correct. What's the word I'm looking for? It's accurate. It looks like a photograph. To, it's a little hazy. To, I don't know what the heck this is. Kind of describes. And that didn't take very long. So it's amazing what's going to happen. So this poor Croesus, who died in battle in around the year 530 BC, is an example of where they came from. And then when we start looking at the statues and the figures on the Parthenon and stuff, it's amazing. The lightness of the figures. This guy's very heavy. I mean, he's fit and everything. He's not overweight, but he's heavy looking. Do you know, like massive and heavy and blocky and stiff and heavy looking. And in 60, 75 years after this, they're going to be producing art that looks light as a feather, like it could just fly away. The Nike of Samothrace that I'm going to bring in, it's a winged victory. With the flowing robes and the wings, she's moving, and you think, that thing looks like I could just lift it up with a finger. It looks so light, like it's about to fly away. It looks so real. I'm sorry, Croesus, you don't look particularly real. And by the way, nobody thinks that's actually a portrait of the guy named Croesus. It's just sort of the stock representation of a young man.
So it's like you found it in the dirt and you're like, oh, what's this?
No, they had it made for him, but they didn't do portraits. They just said, we will put up a statue of a young man and this will represent our son. Does that make sense? And there's a little color on his hair still. It was painted. A lot of people don't realize Greeks painted their statues. They were quite colorful. And there's still a little paint in his hair. Okay, that's my speech about the Kouros statue. So keep that in mind. The stiffness, the formality, and the heaviness over the next few weeks when we look at what it's going to turn into. Okay, here we go. Buckle up, because we're going to Thrace. All right, I am not going to be able to do that. I'm going to have to just put my chair here. You better take some weapons to Thrace, because these guys are tough. Okay, so I am going to zoom through Thrace so we can spend more time in book 5. And this may come as a complete shock and surprise to you, but I can't remember every detail of what's in these books. And I can't just open my book to a certain particular thing and find it. So you're going to have to bear with me sometimes as I go through and look for what it is I want to talk about, okay? So, book 4 starts out. Following the capture of Babylon, hey guys. Following the capture of Babylon, Darius led his army against Scythia. Okay, so, unfortunately, my map is heavy on Europe and light on anything to the east. But you can picture, this is Persia, all right, right? They've been down in Egypt. Darius, in book 4, does this. He goes, there's nowhere I can see him that doesn't block someone. He comes here in what's now Turkey, Asia Minor then, and he goes across this place called the Hellespont. It's not very wide. You can bridge it with a boat bridge fairly easily. And then he goes up here, and he builds another boat bridge across what is today the Danube River, and he calls it the Ister. Herodotus calls it the Ister. And he leaves guys there, and he heads up into the territory of the Thracians up here. And he has a problem. The Thracians are nomads. They don't really have towns. It's kind of hard to burn someone's towns down when they don't have towns. And it's hard to get their stuff when they just pack all their stuff in a wagon and they leave. So in much of book 4, Darius spends a lot of energy and time chasing Thracians. Chasing Thracians around. Question being, maybe, why does Darius want to conquer Thrace in the first place? Got a revenge? Yeah, good remembering. The Thracians had once upon a time come down this way, come down between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, through the Caucasus Mountains that are right here, and taken over and invaded part of northern Persian Empire. Okay, reason number 1.
I was actually thinking along the same lines as that, remembering the old wars, but scared of them instead of maybe even revenge. Like maybe scared of them.
Maybe.
Or, maybe he's just another maniac trying to take over the world.
You know, he does have to live up to Cambyses invaded Egypt. Cyrus invaded, took Babylon and everything. He's got sort of an image to uphold. If I don't take things over, people won't take me seriously as the king of Persia.
You said the Scythians are chasing around here. Would it be that large of a territory? Were the Scythians, you've been chasing the Scythians around, or was it a little
Herodotus, and the maps in this Herodotus make it sound like it was a pretty big area. So when he came across and he left these guys guarding the bridge of boats, he told them, and these guys, almost everything I'm going to say today, no, that's not true. Almost everything I am going to say today is actually important for the plot. There's a few things that are just extraneous. But this actually kind of is. The guys, okay, so on the coast of Asia Minor, these are all Greek cities. Do you remember? They sent out colonies, and these are all Greek cities. And they've been taken over by the Persians, okay? So these guys are working for the Persians. And what do they get in return for working with the Persians? Each of them gets installed as tyrant of one of the cities. And remember, tyrant doesn't necessarily mean they're mean. It just means they've circumvented all the normal courses of taking power, and the Persian king just said, boom, you're in charge. They have gone with him to Thrace, to the Scythians, and they have been put in charge of guarding the boat bridge. And he said to them, give me 90 days. I will be back here in 90 days. And if I am not, you can break the boat bridge down and go home. Because my army has been destroyed, or something unforeseen has happened. That was the time frame. So The Scythian plan is, one of their plans. Plan 1, pack up all our stuff and run away till he wears himself out. And in the process, destroy everything we can, like woods and fields and everything, so he has no resources whatsoever. Plan number 2 is go to these guys guarding the boat bridge and say, hey, do you really like being a slave of the king of Persia? I mean, really? You know, you could just rebel, and then you could be your own boss. You could be self-employed. And this seems like a really good time. If you just break that boat bridge down and leave, you know, he said you could. I don't know how they got this information. Apparently they had spies. He said you could. And as the 90-day limit started coming, they said, here's the deal. I know you don't want to really break your word to the king of Persia. You're not ready to take that step yet. But you're allowed to leave after the 90 days. You know, we're pretty good at running around. We can keep Darius busy for 90 days. Then the moment that 90 days expires, you break that bridge and you go. And when Darius comes back, this is a big river. You're not going to be able to just swim across this river with his army. And he's trapped by this river, and there's a bunch of angry Scythians behind him. Boom. That's not good. And then technically, you see, you Greek tyrants who are slaves of the king of Persia, technically you wouldn't be breaking your promise if you just wait till the 90 days. So they said, there's a guy named Histias. And he said, this is hard. We don't want to tick the Scythians off because they look kind of mean. We don't want to tick Darius off because we know he can be mean. So here's what we'll do, Scythians. We agree with you. See, we're starting to break the boats down. And they start, and he says, okay, just break down the boats just on this side. Just do it slowly until he leaves. Then we can build them back up. Or we can just decide which course to take. But let's get rid of this guy. Let's get rid of this guy because he's breathing down our neck. We're going to break them now. You just go do whatever you want to do. I'm sure you have somewhere to be. We're breaking the boats. Okay. In the meantime, Darius is chasing Scythians all over Thrace. And this brings me to a couple of the questions that I asked you, mostly because I found them humorous. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, I didn't mention this to my students yesterday. I got to tell you the most amazing thing. It's amazing. I got to add a question about this in the book. Okay. So this is one of his crazy side trips, and we're talking suddenly about North Africa and Libya. We're back in Libya. Notice how we keep getting sucked back to Africa over and over. We're in Libya. We're in Egypt. This is at one of those moments. Listen to what Herodotus says. Okay. I'm on the bottom of page 297. This is like explode your mind amazing. Get ready to have your mind exploded. I don't know if it's going to be that exciting for you or not. Okay. I'm at the very last, where it says 2. At the very bottom of page 297. You see, it says a number 2, and it says, for it is clear. Okay, here we go. For it is clear that Libya is surrounded by water. By Libya, he means Africa. You got to keep this in mind. He has no idea how far this continent goes. To him, we got Egypt and Libya. That's all we know. He says, it is clear that Libya is surrounded by water except for where it borders Asia. The first one we know of to have discovered this fact was Nekos, king of Egypt. After he had stopped excavation work on the canal, which extended the Nile to the Arabian Gulf, he talked several times that they were trying to build a canal here to connect the Nile to the Arabian Gulf. He sent some Phoenicians off on boats with orders to sail around Libya and back through the Pillars of Hercules into the Mediterranean Sea. he sent some Phoenicians. They started there, and he sent them to sail all the way around and come back in here. And so the Phoenicians set out from the Erythraean Sea and sailed the southern sea. Whenever autumn came, they would put into shore at whatever region of Libya they happened to have reached in order to sow seeds. There they would wait for the harvest, and after reaping their crops, they would sail on again. They did this for 2 years, and in the third, they came around through the Pillars of Hercules and returned to Egypt. They mentioned something else which I do not find credible, though someone else may, that when they were sailing around Libya, the sun was on their right side as they went. Now, here's what he means. Have you ever noticed that for us in the northern hemisphere, you know, if you're pointed east, the sun, especially towards the winter, it's on your left-hand side. Like it's not right overhead because we live in the north. And if you notice the sun rises in the winter, the sun rises farther and farther south. But think about it. I'm sailing. I'm in the southern hemisphere. I'm sailing around. Here's me. I'm down at the bottom of Africa. I'm way down in the southern hemisphere. The sun is on my right-hand side. And Herodotus like, that never happened. The world doesn't go down there that far. And the very thing that Herodotus says, I do not find this credible, is the reason it's true. Because nobody, he couldn't make that up. The guy said, it's really weird. Like, the sun, like, changed position. It was far to the right. Because, you know, at the equator, it would be straight ahead, right? It would be straight over you. But in the southern hemisphere, it's way off to the right when you come around this way. They spent 2 years. Phoenicians circumnavigated Africa in 600 BC. That's awesome, because we think of it the age of exploration. Like we think of 1400 and Prince Henry the Navigator and, you know, working their way down the coast of Africa and everything. He also tells an unfortunate story about another guy whose mother, it was a choice between being executed and sailing around Africa, sailing around Libya, and he went this way. And he went, you guys know there's a big, what's it, Cape? I don't even remember. The bulge of Africa has a name. You know what I mean? It bulges out and then it comes back in. He sailed around the bulge that I can't remember the name of currently, and came back around and he got scared because it just kept going. Like there was no turn. It just kept going and going. Like, this goes on forever. So he went back and they executed him. Buddy, just sail somewhere else. Why did you go back? I guess he thought they'd say, well, I gave it a good shot. You didn't do it, so we're going to execute you. Okay. I think it's an amazing story. This is why people who start to find Herodotus cool find him cool, because you get these little tidbits. Hey, this has nothing to do with anything. This honestly has nothing to do with anything. I'll just say it, except that he happens to be talking about events in Libya. It's like, you know, you could sail around it. First person that we know did this. Okay, but the first question I actually asked you is, how did Herodotus think the Scythians bathed? And what were they really doing? Did anyone find this? We are on question 1 in your reading guide, in page 42 of your reading guide. And the question is about their bathing. Did anyone find it? Matthew, what are they doing?
You think that they're just kind of bathing with hemp with the vapor, and it looks nice back at it, alien for.
They're smoking marijuana, is what they're doing. Well, the Scythians take the seeds of this cannabis, creep beneath the wool covering the stakes, throw the seeds under the blazing hot stones within. When the seeds hit the stones, they produce smoke and give off a vapor such as no steam bath in Hellas could surpass. The Scythians howl, awed and elated by the vapor. This takes place of a bath for them, since they do not use any water at all to wash their bodies. Well, We know two things about the Scythians. They smoke pot and they never bathe. Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, I didn't even mention that on Tuesday. Oh, so stupid. Where was the merry-go-round of death? Wait, did you guys? Oh, here we go. Okay, Okay, I found the place where they make drinking cups from the heads of their enemies. Oh, thank you. Yes, so this is the section that I referred to as the merry-go-round of death. It's on page 310, but for time constraints, I'm just going to tell you. So when a king dies, they bury him, and then a year later they come and they kill horses, 50 horses, and they kill 50 young men, and they stick poles through the horses, and so they can stand there, and then they stick poles up through the horses, and they stick them through the guy, so the dead guys are sitting there, and they put him around in a circle as a monument.
I would hate to have that.
And so the son, he's actually the one who wrote the Bionicle paper too. He referred to it as the merry-go-round of death, and that's where I got that term. Yes, these guys are brutal. They cut off the top of skulls of their enemies and coat them, in gold, and they drink out of them. And at one point, it was just disturbing. I mean, if that's not disturbing enough, it said, and when outsiders who are considered important come to visit a man, he brings out these heads and explains that though these were his relatives, they brought war upon the family and he overpowered them. Yeah, that was my cousin Joe. He was rotten. I drink wine out of his head now. What? So these are the Scythians. So on page 332, Darius says to them, he sends a messenger and says, "You extraordinary man, why do you keep fleeing?" Because they keep running away, packing up their stuff. "Why do you keep fleeing when you could certainly do otherwise? If you think you are able to challenge my power, stop your wandering and stand up to fight it out. Or if you acknowledge that you are too weak for that course, you should stop running away, bring gifts of earth and water to your master, and enter into negotiations with him." Just, if you're tough enough, fight me. If you're not, submit. So what does he mean, earth and water? What is that? Bring me earth and water. What's he saying?
You give the earth that you own, you give the land that you own, and the water.
Yeah. It's symbolically, I'm turning over my land to you. Just a little bit of earth and a little bit of water. But it means I obey you now. I'm submitting to you. And I asked you, what did they send instead? Did anyone find what the Scythians sent instead? Matthew, what did they send? Yes. And so, I'm just going to read, this will answer the second part of the question. This is at the bottom of page 333. They sent a herald to Darius bearing the following gifts: a bird, a mouse, a frog, and 5 arrows. The Persian asked the herald bearing the gifts what the meaning of these gifts was, but he said he received no orders other than to present the gifts and leave at once.
Where are we?
Bottom of page 333, in the second to last paragraph. He added, however, that the Persians would realize what the gifts meant if they were wise. Having heard this, the Persians considered the matter together. Darius was of the opinion that the gifts meant that the Scythians were surrendering themselves to him with gifts of earth and water. A mouse, he thought, lives in the earth and eats the same crops as humans do. A frog lives in the water. A bird is very much like a horse. Which apparently, I know, according to the foot, maybe Pegasus, apparently they're both fast.
Yeah, they're both.
Okay? And arrows could represent the surrender of their prowess in battle. That was the opinion Darius declared, but it conflicted with the view of Gobryas, one of the 7 men who had deposed the Magus. He's one of that 7 crew that went and killed that Smyrtus guy. He reasoned that the gifts had the following significance. Persians, unless you turn into birds and fly up into the sky, or mice and descend underground, or frogs and hop into the lakes, you will be shot by these arrows and never return home. Okay. So, eventually, they line up for battle. And the bottom of page 42, I asked you, why did Darius finally abandon his attack on the Scythians? Did anybody get an answer for that? I'll read it. After the gifts had been sent to the Persians, the Scythians who had stayed behind deployed their infantry and cavalry in preparation to give battle to Darius. The Scythians were assembled in their positions when a hare darted into the space between the armies. Now, every Scythian, when he saw the hare, began to chase it. They are lined up for battle, and a rabbit ran in between, and the Scythians like, oh, a rabbit! And they start chasing the rabbit. Darius noticed that the Scythians were shouting and in disorder and asked what the uproar among his enemies was all about. When he learned they were chasing a hare, he said to the men with whom he usually discussed everything, "These men look on us with such contempt. I now believe that Gobryas's interpretation of the gifts from the Scythians was correct. And now that I too finally see things this way, we must form a good plan to ensure that our return journey home will be a safe one." These guys are so contemptuous of my whole army that they just break ranks and start chasing a hare. That's what they think. That's how scared they are of me. I better get out of this while I can. Because these guys, I'm never going to beat them. They're going to keep running away. And if that's how they behave before a battle, never been drawn up in a line of battle. But I can tell you, I imagine if I were, I would be really concerned about the guys over there with swords that are going to kill me. And not the rabbit that just ran in between. And Darius says, we got to get out of here. He heads for that bridge of boats, okay? Fortunately, they have only just play acted at disassembling the bridge, and Darius comes and he finds part of it broken. We're all going to die. No, I'm sure Darius would not react that way, but there was some consternation. Oh my gosh, we're too late and they're breaking the bridge. And they come, no, the Ionians, the Greeks who were holding it, no, it was just, it's just a little bit of it. We can put it back together in no time. You're going to get across safely. All right? Now, going back through this, I felt like perhaps I should not have asked this last question because the end of Book 4 is another one of these strange digressions to Libya. But, and it involves a queen named, I'm pronouncing her name Feritime, but it might be Feritime. I don't know. So if you find out I'm wrong, the other person probably knows more than I do. He tells us the story of a man, a Greek man, who was told by a prophecy, as so many of them are, to found a colony in North Africa. And he goes, and he's got his colony, and everything's cool. You know, it's right on here. And you know, Persia has taken over Egypt. And Cambyses, before he died, when he died, they set up a governor there. There's a Persian governor. So this guy starts working with the Persians, right? Okay, I will look out for your interests. You look out for my interests. You know, we'll be buddies. It's a good alliance. But some people in the town don't like this, and they rebel, and they kill him. His mother, Feritime, runs away to Egypt, and she says, you need to help me, because my son was a good ally for the Persians and the Persian governor in Egypt. I want an army. I want to go back and take them out because they killed my son. And the governor says, you got it. So he sends her with an army, and they besiege the city. And after taking the city, hang on, this is on page 363. The city's name is Bark or Barki. I've just been calling it Bark. Okay, I don't know. The people of Bark, who were most responsible for the murder of Archesilaus, were turned over to Pharatime by the Persians. The guys who killed his son. You can do what you want to with them. She had the men impaled in a circle around the wall, and the women's breasts cut off and placed at intervals around the wall as well. She told the Persians to regard the remaining Barkians as their spoils of war, except for the clan of Batos, or who had not been responsible for the murder. To them, Pharatime entrusted the city. Now, the reason I asked you this, and I asked you, how does she die? And this is the answer to that question. Yeah, Matthew, you tell me the answer. You say it. Yeah, like Herod in the Bible, it says, the final strands in the life of Pharatime were woven with misery. For as soon as she had received her revenge on the Barkians, she left Libya and returned to Egypt, where she died a miserable death from worms which teemed within her body and crawled out from it while she still lived. Thus, listen to this, thus the gods manifest their resentment against humans who execute vengeance violently and excessively. Such was the brutal vengeance wreaked by Pharatime, wife of Batos, against the Barkians. Herodotus, just when you think, Guy, I don't know why we're talking about this, but he sees moral lessons. You know, it's not popular today to read history for moral lessons, but Herodotus sees them all over the place. We already heard one of them, that when you are unjust, when there's great injustice, the vengeance of the gods is swift. And now we've heard, when you take revenge violently and aggressively, it will come back to bite you, right? That there is a justice in the world and in the gods, and when you overstep the bounds of justice or what is right, and apparently in Herodotus' opinion, Pharatime did so in her revenge, you get it in the end. Yeah, Ethan. And then you, Kyle. I know. Oh, I know.
But that's our flesh to take vengeance on people who hurt us or others.
This is true, and Ethan brings up a good point because, you know, this is a pagan society. And he's like, vengeance left, right, and everywhere, and certainly a mama vengeance, we can understand that. But even they had a code of living in the bounds of what is seemly, what is becoming. Do you know what I mean? And not transgressing that. This is why the church fathers often saw Christian ideas peeking through, peeking through little windows from the pagan world. That they understood some of these things. They just didn't understand the reasons for it. Why there should be restraint like that. Kyle, you wanted to say something.
So Kristen dies, and then she goes to visit her, and she says, "My son's out of you. Give me an army." And they just give it to her.
Yeah.
Really?
Well,
I guess they also wanted to take the city. So
yeah.
there's a way to do it.
I think that the Persians are now going to take over Bark.
They gave the city back, but
Well, she said, yeah.
people got that popular, but then give the city back to the people that were there. It didn't. And so you lost men. You got revenge. And that's it.
Maybe the Persians, it was a good show of faith that the people who are our allies, we know how to take care of them. You know? We don't just let them get murdered with impunity. If some other city is going to execute their ally, I don't know.
You have to put your allies that way. You have to do this for me, I'll have to do this for you. That's not like, if you wouldn't have got a fight with me. Like, it's like,
Yeah. Okay, I do not have the answer. But notice how Herodotus, and we're now going to just dive into book 5, and I'm going to tell you the story of a lot of it just to make sure that you're following it. But do you notice how much Herodotus credits personal feelings and desires for great events of history? Like, she's ticked off because her son got killed. Croesus gets his kingdom taken away because his great-grandpa hid behind that lady's bedroom door and watched her getting undressed for bed. And people have very personal reasons, and their personal reasons set into motion great historical events. Whereas we tend to think of it's all strategy. You know what I mean? Like, war is based on strategy and what's best for my country. And in Herodotus, it's like, they made me leave my home and I want to go back there, so I'm going to plot to get back there. And it starts a war. And it makes me wonder how much of history has been like that. Like, are there people and things behind the scenes? You know what I mean? Like, somebody's pouting over something, and then suddenly you've got a war. What? I'm coming back with an army. Okay, so the first question I asked you is, in Herodotus' opinion, what keeps the Thracians from being the strongest of all nations? Anybody? Matthew.
If they had one leader, they would be united.
Yeah. He says, if they could all be united under one ruler and think the same way, they would, in my opinion, be the most invincible and strongest of all nations. But that is impossible. It will never happen, since their weakness is that they are incapable of uniting and agreeing. They are incapable. I want to point something out. Do you remember what we said about the Greek city-states? They don't get along. Hardly ever. It is like pulling teeth, as they say, to get two of them to cooperate to do anything. And I just wonder if Herodotus is like sideways shout out to Greece. Yeah, if they just unite under one leader, they could get something done. But that will never happen, because we are about to witness in the remainder of this book one of the very, very few times in all of Greek history that they actually got together and accomplished something. And unfortunately, not all of them did, but enough of them did to accomplish the goal. But it lasted about 10 years, 20 years. It didn't last long. Yes, Athens and Sparta, they were always at it. So, let me answer this one question, and then we're going to kind of go through the story. I mentioned to you this previously, and I asked you here, how does Herodotus say they got the art of writing in Greece? Anybody other than Matthew? Sorry, Matthew, go for it. The Phoenicians. Remember we talked about that Europa got on that bull, and she left Phoenicia, and then Cadmus followed her. Herodotus concurs. He said, they taught them the alphabet, which I believe the Hellenes did not have previously, which originally used by all the Phoenicians. We're pretty sure this is true. We're pretty sure that hippopotamuses don't have manes. We're pretty sure this is true. Okay, here we go. This is the story of Book 5. Now, to keep myself straight, I have to kind of follow in the margins, okay? So I'm going to follow, and then I'm going to tell you the story. Okay, do you remember Histios? Histios is the Greek guy. He is in charge of Miletus, a lovely Greek city right about there. And he says, Histios, you managed the whole affair over the Danube River, the Ister River, beautifully. May I reward you? Histios says, you certainly can. I would like to found a new city. I want to put it over here, like over here, and I'm going to call it Myrkinos. And I'm going to go over there and just start building right away. I'm going to take some guys with me. And Darius is like, you do that. However, yes. Hang on. I've got to. Okay, here we go. Now, Megabazos, he is the Roman general, or the Roman, I've been reading too much Roman history. He is the Persian general who is in charge of cleaning up the Hellespont area and conquering people for the king. Megabazos reached the Hellespont, and he crossed over to Asia and came to Sardis. When he learned that Histiaeus of Miletus was building fortifications at the site along the Strymon River called Myrkinos, which he had received from Darius after requesting his reward for guarding the bridge of boats, as soon as Megabazos arrived in Sardis, he spoke to Darius about this. Sire, just think what you have done. You gave a dangerously clever Greek permission to found a city for himself in Thrace, where timber is abundant and construction of ships and oars, where there are silver mines and multitudes of both Hellenes and barbarians. As soon as these people find a leader, they will follow his orders day and night. So put an end to what this man is doing and thus avoid being afflicted by war within your own territory. Send for him and stop him, but treat him gently. And when you have him in your grasp, see to it that he never returns to the territory of the Hellenes. So Darius said, you know what, you're right. He's smart. I don't want him setting himself up as some sort of king. So, but you gotta play it cool. You don't want to arouse suspicion. So he does this. Oh, Histiaeus, I need to send you a message because I miss you. You know what? After you were gone, I realized there's nobody like you. You're so smart, and you give such good advice. And I just feel like I would be a better king if you were with me. So will you come and just come to Susa and live there and eat at my table and be my counselor? And we'll put someone else in charge of you know, your cities over there, and it's fine. And you just stay with me. And Histiaeus, of course, doesn't suspect anything at this point. You bet. I got an offer to live in the king's palace and eat from the king's table and be his right-hand man counselor. I like it. It's a good gig. So he goes back. However, apparently, as time goes on, it becomes more and more apparent to Histiaeus what he's really doing there. And he won't ever be leaving. Not that his life is necessarily in danger or anything, you know. They don't want to kill him. They just want to keep him neutralized, right? Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And keep him there. So, okay, hang on. I got to get the next. It's a very complicated story. Okay. Okay, so Aristagoras, he's a relative of Histiaeus, and he's been put in charge of Miletus because Histiaeus has been taken away. And Aristagoras gets this brainstorm. You know what? There's this island. I can't remember. It's either this island or this island, okay? Or one of these three islands. Naxos, all right? There were some ambassadors that came from Naxos, and they're like, we've been exiled and we want to take our rights again, and will you help us? And Aristagoras is like, I could attack Naxos. I could take it for the Persians. I could just take over the island. I can tell these guys I'm going to help them get their, you know, authority back, but really we're just taking over the island. So, this is a great plan. This will get me in the good graces of, you know, my boss. So he goes to Sardis. Sardis is the capital of the area, and I can't remember the guy's name. Artaphernes. Oh, I've just read this like many times just this week because I was trying to do a good job on this. Artaphernes says, "Okay, thumbs up to the plan. I'll give you ships. I'll give you men. I'll give you money. Go attack Naxos." It's a complete failure, miserable and utter failure. They besiege the city won't fall, it's just awful. And Aristagoras has borrowed much money and made big promises to the Persian king and the Persian governor. He's not fulfilling any of it. It doesn't look good. Aristagoras has even gone in debt. And he's borrowed money to pull this thing off, because it's going to be so sweet when it happens. But it didn't happen. And Aristagoras says this. Herodotus says this. So Aristagoras failed to fulfill his promise to Artaphernes, and at the same time, the cost of the expedition had pressed him hard financially. Moreover, he feared that because of the army's lack of success and the accusations of Megabates, his absolute rule over Miletus would be taken away from him. Plagued with anxiety, he began to plan a revolt, step by step, and by coincidence, the man with the tattooed head arrived just then from Histios and Susa, delivered Histios' command that Aristagoras revolt from the king. The man with the tattooed head sounds like a murder mystery title. Okay, so who's this guy? So Histios, he's stuck in Susa. Wanted to tell Aristagoras to revolt, but could not safely send him an instruction to do so, since the roads were guarded. So he had chosen his most trustworthy slave, shaved his head, tattooed it with the message, and waited for the hair to grow back. As soon as it had done so, he sent the slave off with instructions to do nothing other than go to Miletus, and once there, tell Aristagoras to shave off his hair and look at his head. As I mentioned earlier, the tattooed message ordered him to revolt. Histios had made his move because he resented being detained at Susa and had high hopes that he would be released to go to the coast in the event of a revolt. If they rebel, the king will send me to put it down. I'll get to go home. So that was the intent of Histios when he sent the messenger. And just so happened that all these circumstances converged at the same time. Aristagoras is out of money. He's on the rocks with the Persians because he promised and he didn't deliver. Then the tattooed head shows up and says, hey, revolt from the king. No, that's what I wanted to do. That's going to save me. It's going to save me. So, but I need help. This is big. This is the king of Persia. This is huge. I need some help. I'm going to Greece. So he sent a messenger to Sparta. And then we get a little digression about the kings of Sparta. Not to worry. Many kings of Sparta. But the king currently is Cleomenes. He goes to Cleomenes and he tells him this is a really, really good deal. Persia is rich. Persia is powerful. You will go down in history as the Spartan king that took on Persia, and it will be glorious. So he keeps leading him on. Cleomenes won't give him an answer. Finally, the third day he's there. Hang on. Oh, I'm in the digression about his son who went to found a colony. Okay, here we go. When the day that they had appointed for the answer arrived, and they met at the place they had agreed upon, Cleomenes asked Aristagoras how many days' journey would it take to go from the sea of the Ionians to the king. Aristagoras, though he had cleverly misled Cleomenes in everything else, stumbled at this point, for he ought not to have told him the real distance if he wanted to bring the Spartans into Asia. But instead he told them it was a journey of 3 months inland. 3 months. At that, Cleomenes cut him short, and focusing on the journey said, my guest friend of Miletus, you must depart from Sparta before sunset. Your request will never be accepted by the Lacedaemonians if you intend to lead them on a 3-month journey from the sea. Greeks don't like to go away from the sea, you know. When we sail around, we sail by the coast. Every part of Greece is pretty close to the sea. We don't do 3-month marches inland. Don't do it. So, Aristagoras is like, whew, blast it. Now I have to go to Athens. I'll go ask Athens if they'll help me, which he does. We have a digression about the roads, the King's Road in Persia. But now we got to find out what's going on in Athens. Do you remember when last we left Athens? Pisistratus was a tyrant there. He's the guy who hired the 6-foot beautiful woman to be Athena and say, let Pisistratus come back. He's dead. And his sons Hippias and Hipparchus took over, and his son Hipparchus was killed in an ugly gay love triangle situation, which I will not pursue further. But Hippias is left. Now, listen to this. See, this is, oh, I love this. Okay. We are on pages 392 and 393. I'm at the bottom of page 392, okay? Bottom of page 392. As the Alcmaeonids, they're the ruling nobility of Athens. They are not Pisistratus' family. As the Alcmaeonids were considering every strategy they could think of against the Pisistratids, we want to get rid of Hippias. We don't want tyrants anymore. They accepted a contract from the Amphictyones to build the temple at Delphi, the same one that is there now, but which had not yet been built at the time. And since they were not only quite wealthy, but also distinguished in their lineage, the temple they constructed turned out more beautiful in all respects than the original plan required. For example, whereas the agreement had called for them to use tufa in the building material, they built a facade of Parian marble instead. Great. Who cares? Here's why we care. Now the Athenians say that these men established themselves at Delphi and bribed the Pythia, the priestess, to urge all Spartans who came to consult the oracle, whether on private or public missions, to liberate Athens. Here's what Herodotus just said. While they're building the new temple, they make some friends and they spread a little cash around. And they say, hey, every time a Spartan comes to consult the oracle, let part of their answer be, you need to go to Athens and get rid of the tyrants. They paid them off. And so these Spartans keep going home. They're like, I don't know. Every time we go to the oracle, it says we should go throw the tyrants out of Athens. I guess we should go throw the tyrants out of Athens. So they do. They get rid of Hippias. Hippias runs off to the king of Persia and says, those dirty, rotten Athenians took away my rule. I want to go get it back. Okay? Then I asked you, okay, so that's how did Athens get rid of their tyrants? They bribed the oracle to get the Spartans to come throw them out. Next, what military effect does Herodotus believe driving the tyrants out had on them? Did anybody find this? Matthew, did you find it?
So that an equal voice in government made it so that they didn't slack on their time, but were ardent for ignorant and
Yes. He thinks that democracy makes men valiant and tyranny makes them losers. Here, that's my paraphrase. This is what he says. So the Athenians had increased in strength, which demonstrates that an equal voice in government has beneficial impact, not merely in one way, but in every way. The Athenians, while ruled by tyrants, were no better in war than any of the peoples living around them. But once they were rid of the tyrants, they became by far the best of all. So the Spartans realized, oh shoot, what did we do? We got rid of their tyrants, and now they're awesome. I don't like this. I think maybe we should put the tyrants back on the throne. So they have, going through book 5, these Spartans have a meeting, and they say, I think we should replace Hippias on the throne, because the Athenians are just getting too good for us. You know, they're getting to be good in battle. And then we have a very long, multi-page speech where a guy stood up, he's from Corinth, and he said, what is going on here? Since when does Sparta run around putting tyrants on other people's thrones? Guess what, Sparta? You've never had a tyrant, have you? Because you got your 2 kings in Sparta and everything's hunky-dory. But let me tell you, we had a tyrant once in Corinth, and he was awful. This goes on, this goes on for several pages, okay? I'm not going to tell you the story of the tyrant of Corinth. But his wrap-up is, that's just wrong, and we're not going to help you do it. All right, so that's where we leave this. Okay, so here we go. It was at this juncture, when they were feeling quite antagonistic towards the Persians, Why? Because Hippias just ran off to them. That Aristagoras of Miletus arrived in Athens after his expulsion from Sparta. And he said, hey, Athens, you want to send ships? You want to send troops? And they said, you betcha. So, they did not actually say the words, you betcha. But it was close. After the Athenians had been won over, they voted to dispatch 20 ships to help the Ionians and appointed Melanthion, a man of the city who was distinguished in every respect, as commander over them. These ships turned out to be the beginning of evils for both Hellenes and barbarians. Why? Because when the ships arrive, they land in Miletus, and then they join troops. They take over Miletus. Miletus rebels. Then they march to Sardis, which is roughly like inland right about here. It is the capital city. It is the governor's city. And they burn it down. And there is no coming back from that. Darius is not just going to sit there and twiddle his thumbs, oh, it's a shame about Sardis. He's going to do something about it. So Sardis burns down with the help of Athens. Now, flipping up a few pages, the news comes to Darius. They rebelled on the coast, and they burnt down your capital there. It is said that when Darius first heard this report, he disregarded the Ionians, since he knew that they at least would not escape punishment for their revolt. But he inquired who the Athenians were. And when he had been told, he asked for a bow. He took the bow, set an arrow on its string, and shot the arrow toward the heavens. And as it flew high into the air, he said, Zeus, let it be granted to me to punish the Athenians. After saying this, he appointed one of his attendants to repeat to him 3 times whenever his dinner was served, my lord, remember the Athenians. Don't forget, they burnt down Sardis. My lord, remember the Athenians. Every meal. Okay? So, guess what comes next? Histeos. Come here. Didn't you hear they're rebelling on the coast? Did you have anything to do with this? Me? I would never instigate a revolt. You know why it happened? It happened because I wasn't there. If I had been there, they'd be very obedient. But I think you should send me there, and I'll get it taken care of, which is exactly what Histeos wanted the whole time when he sent the tattooed head guy. He plays it very well. He plays it very well. So he gets sent to Ionia to deal with it. The Persians head west. But the end of Book 5 is more taken up with some operations on the island of Cyprus, which kind of breaks the flow here. There's been some rebellions in Cyprus, so they stop. Cyprus is this island right here.
Speaking of rebellions,
Yes, Cyprus rebellion. So just to wrap up the story of our friend Aristagoras, who tried to take Naxos and failed, went heavily into debt, and went and petitioned to get the Athenians to come help him burn down Sardis. After these cities had been captured, the Persians are coming and retaking them. Aristagoras revealed how weak-spirited he really was. For when he saw the disorder and upheaval in Ionia that he had stirred up, he now began to realize that it would be impossible for him to get the better of Darius. You think? And he began to think instead about escape. So he summoned his partisans and deliberated with them, advising them that they would all be better off if they had some place of refuge in case they were forced to leave Miletus. He gave them a choice, that he would either lead them to Sardinia, where they would found a colony, or to the city of Myrkinos, in Adonia, where Histeos had begun to fortify. That was the choice that Aristagoras asked them to consider. So they decided to go to Myrkinos. After he had entrusted Miletus to Pythagoras, a distinguished citizen, he enlisted every man willing to accompany him and sailed with them to Thrace, which is kind of a nice, we started this book ending our discussion of Thrace, and we just circled back into Thracian territory, where he took possession of the site he had set out to obtain. Using this as his base, he surrounded and laid siege to a Thracian city. And although the Thracians were willing to leave the place under truce, it was here in the fighting that occurred that Aristagoras and his army perished at the hands of the Thracians. And he leaves our story. So, here's where we are. Sardis is dust and ashes, including a temple. So the Athenians are going to be accused not of only rebellion, but impiety to the gods. So when the Persians show up in Athens, which they will burn its temples. It's like, boom, take that. You think you can burn down Sardis's temples? We'll burn down your temples. All right? Now, we're going to read books 6 and 7. You guys are troopers. Stick with it. Even if you're only reading a part of it, try to see some of the flow. At least try to read some. I really believe in all of you that you can read this. All right? But stick with me the best you can, okay? We have 2 more weeks, and then we're moving on to something completely different. This is the week when we're going to be at the Battle of Marathon. This is the week that we're going to meet those 300 Spartans in the pass at Thermopylae. All right? This is going to be the stuff that you think of when we think the Persian wars against Greece, okay? It only took him like 400 pages. But he's there. And so, unfortunately, at this point, there's no parts that I can say this isn't so. There will be digressions. But we're more, the path is set. Darius, every time he sits down to eat, has this guy saying, "Sire, remember the Athenians." And he's not going to let it go till he takes out Greece. All right? Or at least tries to. 6 and 7. And begin your history of whatever you want. I can hardly wait to find out what I'm going to hear from you guys. I feel like this will give me insight into your interests and your lives, you know. Would somebody take my clips down and my map? And you guys have a really good week. I'll see you next time.
Greek, Roman,